I never believed a single touch could stop time until she did. It was one of those evenings when the sky couldn't decide whether to cry or hold back. The rain came softly at first, a hesitant drizzle that painted silver trails across the glass. I've been walking without purpose, the kind of wandering you do when you've got too much on your mind and nowhere to put it. My new job had brought me to this quiet seaside town just a week ago, and already the days were blurring together. Same office walls, same polite smiles, same quiet dinners alone. When the downpour finally came, I ducked into the first place I saw, a small cafe tucked between two bookshops, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. The sign above the door simply read Harbor Light. Fitting, I thought, for a place that felt like a shelter from the storm. The bell above the door chimed softly, and that's when I saw her. She stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled just past her elbows, her hair loosely pinned as if she'd been too busy to care how perfect it looked. There was nothing dramatic about her. No movie-like entrance, no sudden spark of music, just a woman with calm eyes and a kind of grace that made the rest of the world blur around her. "Rough weather for wandering," she said with a small smile, her voice carrying the warmth of someone used to speaking softly in loud rooms. "Guess I needed somewhere to get lost," I replied, half joking. She tilted her head, amused. "Then you picked the right place." As she turned to make my coffee, I noticed small details I shouldn't have. The way her hands moved with practiced rhythm, the faint sound of her bracelet brushing against the cup, the quiet hum she made without realizing. It wasn't attraction in the loud, reckless way. It was quieter, a kind of fascination you don't admit even to yourself. When she handed me the cup, our fingers brushed, just a second of contact. But it was enough. Her touch was warm, grounding, and for a reason I couldn't explain, it made me forget about the rain entirely. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and roasted beans, but I remember only the faint trace of her perfume, something floral, like lilies after a storm. I sat by the window, pretending to read, but mostly watching her move between tables, her presence gentle but magnetic. When I finally left, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened with reflections of streetlights and puddles. I remember looking back through the window. She was wiping down a table, humming again, unaware that I was standing there, still caught in whatever spell she'd unknowingly cast. That night, as I lay in my new apartment listening to the sound of distant waves, I found myself thinking not of work, not of the move, not even of the rain, only of her, and the strange, quiet way her touch had made the world disappear for a moment, as if she'd reminded me how to feel again. The rain never lasted long in that town. It came and went like passing moods, leaving the air cool and the streets washed clean. But she stayed with me, in my thoughts, in the corners of my mind I didn't know were still awake. I told myself I went back to the cafe for the quiet, for the smell of roasted beans and sea breeze drifting through the cracked window. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. I went back because she was there. The second time I walked in, she recognized me instantly. Her smile was polite at first, then softer, like a secret shared between two people who hadn't spoken much, but already understood something unspoken. "You're back," she said lightly, drying her hands on a folded towel. "Guess the coffee helped me survive the week," I answered. "Or maybe the silence did," she teased. I laughed, a real one this time. It surprised me. So did the way her eyes lingered for half a second before she turned to make my order. There was rhythm to her movements, calm, deliberate, almost meditative. Every gesture told a story. The way she leaned slightly forward when she poured milk, how she brushed a stray lock of hair from her face with the back of her wrist. She moved with confidence, but there was still something guarded in her, like she was keeping parts of herself tucked away where no one could reach. I started visiting more often, some days to read, other days just to sit and listen. The cafe was rarely crowded, and sometimes I'd be the only customer, watching sunlight ripple through the glass, painting her in warm shades of gold and honey. We'd talk about small things, books stacked on the window ledge, the sound of gulls in the morning, the strange comfort of routine. She'd laugh quietly, a sound that always felt too short, as if she wasn't used to being heard. One afternoon, as she set a cup in front of me. Her fingers brushed my shoulder, just enough to make me forget what I'd been saying. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even meaningful, not to anyone watching. But in that brief, almost accidental moment, the world seemed to hush. My chest tightened, and I felt that same quiet electricity that had startled me the first time. She didn't notice, or maybe she pretended not to, but her eyes flickered, and for a second I thought I saw something there. Recognition, fear, maybe even longing. When she turned away, I caught the faintest smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, like she'd felt it too, and wasn't ready to admit it yet. I stayed until closing that evening, pretending to read, pretending I hadn't noticed the way she moved closer whenever she spoke. The cafe lights dimmed, and as I stepped out into the salt-tinged air, I realized something had shifted. I no longer came here to escape the noise of the world. I came because her quiet had become the only sound I wanted to hear. The days blurred into weeks, and the cafe had quietly become a part of my routine, though I knew it wasn't the coffee that drew me back. It was her, Elena. I'd learned her name from the small brass tag pinned to her apron. It suited her, gentle, timeless, with a hint of something distant. The kind of name you whisper, not shout. It was a Thursday evening when the sky outside darkened earlier than usual, the clouds pressing low over the ocean. The cafe was empty except for the two of us. I'd stayed long after the last customer left, sketching in my notebook while she cleaned the counter, humming that same soft tune she always did when she thought no one was listening. When the storm broke, thunder rolling like a slow heartbeat, she sighed, leaning on the counter. "You might have to wait it out," she said. "The streets flood when it rains like this." I smiled. "I don't mind waiting." She hesitated, then poured herself a cup of coffee and another for me. Then, "You can keep me company," she said, her tone casual but her eyes uncertain. We sat near the window. The rain hit the glass like whispered applause. For a while, we said nothing, just listened to the rhythm of the storm. Then she spoke, quietly at first, as if testing whether she still remembered how to share pieces of herself. "This place used to belong to my husband," she said, staring into her cup. "He loved the sea, so it made him feel free. But I think maybe I reminded him too much of the shore. Something he always had to come back to." Her voice didn't tremble, but something in her eyes did. I didn't interrupt. I just listened, really listened. She told me how they'd opened the cafe together a decade ago, how the laughter and warmth of those early days had slowly faded into silence. A marriage that unraveled not with fights, but with distance. He'd left, she said, quietly one morning, leaving behind the keys and a note she never showed anyone. I watched her fingers tighten around the mug, knuckles pale against the porcelain. There was no bitterness in her words, only acceptance, worn smooth by time. But beneath it, I could hear the ache of someone who'd spent years pretending she was fine. When she finally looked up, her smile was soft, brave even. "Sorry," she said, shaking her head. "You didn't come here to hear all that." "I did," I said before I could stop myself. "Maybe not on purpose, but I think I was meant to." She studied me for a moment, eyes searching as if deciding whether to believe me. Then she exhaled, a slow, shaky breath that seemed to release years of unspoken weight. Outside, the thunder softened to rain. Inside, the silence between us felt different now. Not empty, but full. Full of everything we hadn't said yet. When I left that night, I could still feel her presence with me. The sound of her voice, the sadness behind her smile, and the quiet realization that I didn't just admire her anymore. I cared for her, deeply, dangerously, and far more than I should have. The storm had passed by the next evening, leaving behind a sky washed clean and air that smelled of salt and wet pavement. The cafe was quiet again, just like the night before. Only this time, I stayed later, not because of the rain, but because I couldn't bring myself to leave. Elena moved around the counter, wiping tables, humming softly as she always did. The lights had dimmed to a soft amber glow, and the reflection of the ocean shimmered faintly through the window. There was something peaceful about watching her work, the steady rhythm of her movements, the way her hair caught the light when she turned her head. I don't think I've ever seen anyone close a cafe this carefully, I said, half smiling as she stacked the last of the cups. She glanced up, amused. Habit, I guess. When you do something long enough, you start treating it like a person, with care. She spoke like that sometimes, in simple sentences that carried a kind of wisdom you didn't hear often. We stood in companionable silence for a while. I helped her push in a few chairs, lock the display case, turn off the front lights. It felt natural, easy, as though I'd done 100 times before. The world outside was dark, but inside there was warmth. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock, the quiet rhythm of two people moving together without trying. Then it happened. I was talking something about how the rain sounded against the sea when she reached out to stop me. It was instinctive, almost thoughtless. Her hand landed on my arm, light as a whisper. And just like that, everything stopped. Her fingers were warm through the fabric of my sleeve, her touch steady but trembling just enough for me to feel it. She froze too, as if realizing what she'd done, but neither of us moved. The air between us shifted, heavier, softer. I could hear the faint catch in her breath. The smell of coffee and vanilla lingered on her skin. My heartbeat filled the silence. When I looked in her eyes, I saw something raw there, surprise, maybe fear, but also recognition. Like she was seeing the same truth I'd been fighting to ignore. She let her hand linger for a moment longer. Long enough for time to stretch thin, long enough for the rest of the world to fall away. Then, slowly she pulled back. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice barely above a breath. "Don't be," I said quietly, but she was already looking down, her composure returning like a tide coming in to hide the shore again. We didn't speak much after that. She thanked me for helping. I said good night, and we stood by the door a moment too long before I finally stepped into the cool night. The sound of the sea followed me home, but all I could feel was the warmth that had passed from her hand to my arm. Still there, still burning softly, as if her touch had branded something inside me I couldn't name. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that quiet cafe, her hand on my sleeve, and the whole world gone silent except for the sound of her breath and the realization that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after her touch, everything felt different, though nothing had changed outwardly. The cafe still opened at 7 sharp. The same sea breeze filtered through the door, the same soft music played from the old speaker near the counter. But beneath it all, there was something new, a tension we both pretended not to feel. Elena greeted me with her usual calm smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Her voice was steady, polite, a little too careful. And when she handed me my cup, she made sure our fingers didn't brush this time. It was such a small thing, that absence of touch, yet I felt it like a loss. We spoke about ordinary things, weather, work, how the tourist season was ending. But between the words, silence crept in. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of all the things you're both afraid to say. I noticed how she avoided standing too close. How her laughter, once soft and spontaneous, now sounded measured, as if she was afraid of what it might stir. I wanted to tell her that she didn't have to pull away, that whatever passed between us that night wasn't something to regret. But I didn't. I didn't because I could see it in her eyes, the fear of what people would think. The small-town whispers, the glances that would linger too long if they ever saw us together outside this place. She'd built her life on quiet dignity, on self-control, on keeping her heart in check. And now here I was, threatening that without meaning to. So I respected her distance, even though it hurt. The days grew cooler, the air carrying the scent of rain and salt. I still came by the cafe, sitting in my usual spot, pretending to read or write. She would bring me coffee without asking, and our conversations would hover safely above the surface. But every time our eyes met, just for a second too long, I could feel that night between us. The warmth, the stillness, the touch. Sometimes she'd catch herself looking at me and quickly turn away, a faint color rising in her cheeks. Other times, I'd find her standing at the window after I'd left, her hand resting lightly on the counter, lost in thought. It became a rhythm. Closeness, retreat, closeness again. Like the tide that touched the shore only to pull back, again and again, never quite daring to stay. People in town began to notice my frequent visits. A few smiles, a few half-joking remarks. I saw how those glances made her tense, how she straightened her shoulders a little more each time, putting invisible walls back in place. I understood. Still, it didn't make it easier. One evening, as I walked past the cafe after closing, I saw her inside. Lights dimmed, wiping the same table over and over, lost in thought. For a moment, I almost went in, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there under the street lamp, watching the shadows play across her face, and realized that love isn't always about closeness. Sometimes, it's about standing quietly in the distance, hoping the person you care for knows you're still there, waiting even when you can't reach out. And somehow, that night, I knew she did. The days had grown shorter. The sea turned colder, rougher, as if the seasons themselves mirrored the distance between us. I hadn't seen Elena for almost a week. Not since the morning she politely told me she'd be closing the cafe for some personal days. She'd said it with a smile, but I could tell something inside her was unsettled. Without those quiet mornings, the town felt emptier. The sound of waves no longer soothed me. It only reminded me of her, of the warmth she'd pulled from me with a single touch, and the silence she'd left behind. That evening, I found myself walking toward the beach, the same stretch of sand where the cafe's back alley led. The sun was melting into the horizon, streaks of orange and violet scattered across the sky. I wasn't expecting to see her, but she was there, sitting alone on a weathered bench facing the water, her cardigan pulled tight around her, her hair moving gently in the wind. I stopped a few steps away, not wanting to startle her. She turned, as if she'd felt me before hearing me. Her expression softened, not surprised, not afraid, just tired, in a way that spoke of nights spent thinking too much. "You always find me when I'm trying to disappear," she said quietly. I smiled faintly. Maybe I'm just bad at letting people go. She turned back toward the sea, her voice barely above the waves. "I've been thinking about everything. About us. About that night." There was the word us. I hadn't dared to use it, though I'd felt it for weeks. "I shouldn't have let things go that far," she continued. "You're young. You have your life ahead of you. People wouldn't understand." "Elena," I interrupted softly. "I don't care what people understand." She looked at me then, really looked at me. Her eyes glistened in the fading light, the wind catching a strand of hair across her face. I reached out, hesitating before tucking it gently behind her ear. She didn't pull away. "I don't want you to feel sorry for me," she said, her voice breaking just slightly. "I don't," I whispered. "I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. You make everything feel clearer, quieter, like the world finally makes sense when you're near." For a moment, neither of us moved. The waves rolled closer, brushing against the rocks, steady and rhythmic. Then she exhaled, and her hand found mine, hesitant, trembling, but there. "You don't know how long it's been since someone said something like that to me," she murmured. "I don't need to know," I said. "I just know I meant it." The silence that followed wasn't awkward this time. It was full of everything we'd both been afraid to say, now out in the open. As the sun sank lower, painting her face in soft amber light, she squeezed my hand gently. Her touch was still the same, warm, grounding, unshakably real. "Maybe," she said quietly, "some things are meant to happen, even if they make no sense." And in that moment, I stopped fighting the storm inside me. For the first time, neither of us looked away. Morning came slowly to the town by the sea. Soft light poured through the mist, touching the rooftops, the gulls, the cobblestones still damp from the night before. The world felt gentler, as if it too had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. It had been 2 weeks since that evening on the beach, the evening when everything unsaid had finally been spoken aloud. Elena had reopened the cafe, and though I didn't rush back the very next day, part of me always knew I'd return, not out of habit, but because it felt right. When I finally pushed open the familiar door, the bell above it chimed softly, just as it always had. She looked up from behind the counter and smiled. A real one this time. Not polite, not guarded. Just real. "You're late," she said, pretending to scold, though her voice carried warmth. "I didn't know we had a schedule," I replied, setting my bag down. "Maybe we do now." There was no tension between us, no edge of hesitation like before. Just an easy calm, the kind that comes when two people have finally stopped running from what they feel. She poured 2 cups of coffee and nodded toward the table by the window, our table. We sat there as the sun lifted higher, spilling gold across the wooden floors. Outside, the ocean was still waking, waves rolling in and out, steady as breathing. Inside, everything felt new again. "I've been thinking," she said, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "About that night. About what you said." I looked at her, waiting. "I think you were right," she continued. "Maybe we don't have to make sense of it. Maybe it's enough just to feel what's true." Her voice was quiet, but sure. And when her eyes met mine, I saw the woman who'd once hidden behind duty and restraint, now letting herself be seen. She reached across the table, her hand resting lightly over mine. It was such a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of everything we'd been through. The silence, the distance, the fear, the longing. Her touch wasn't hesitant this time. It was steady, familiar. Home. We talked for hours, not about what had happened, but about small things. The new mural on the boardwalk, the sound of rain on tin roofs, the book she'd been reading. Ordinary things that somehow felt sacred now. At one point, she laughed, a clear, effortless laugh that filled the whole cafe. I realized then that I'd never truly heard it before. And in that moment, something inside me settled. We didn't need promises or plans or explanations. The connection we had didn't need to be defined, only lived. As the first customers began to arrive, I stood to leave. She followed me to the door, the morning light catching the soft curve of her smile. "See you tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow," I said, and as I stepped into the sunlit street, I felt it again, the same warmth from that first touch, only softer now. Not electric, not overwhelming, just steady, familiar, and real. The kind of warmth that doesn't make you forget where you are anymore. The kind that makes you feel at home.